The next module we need to talk about is property management. And obviously, if this is something you would be interested in doing, then this will be helpful information. Otherwise, it will absolutely be helpful information on the exam, whether you decide to practice managing property for others or not. Now, I will tell you, this is a very condensed version or piece of information concerning property management. If property management is something you would like to do in addition to selling, obviously you could do that. You can do property management and or sales with the license you're going to be getting from taking this course, at least in some states. And we'll talk about more about that licensing requirement here in a little bit. But the main point I want to make is this. I will just tell you, to manage property, you're going to need more training than what you're just going to get in this module. I promise you that. Highly recommend. I know in some states like South Carolina, which is where I am, they require just a 30-hour property management course. I'm sure other states have similar type training, but I highly recommend you take that training. Not that you need it necessarily to practice property management, but you're going to need it just so you know what in the world you're doing, for crying out loud. All right, but so in this module, we are going to talk about what some of the duties of the property managers, what they are. We're going to talk about these management agreements, the lease agreements, things like that. But we're going to start out with the property management agreement. Or actually some just some property management details, I guess, right here to start with. But y'all, some states require you to have a property management license in order to practice property management. Now, I think probably most states will say as long as you have a real estate license, then property management would be included as something that you could do. But again, some states require you to have a license. So make sure, let me back up. You can't get out there and start practicing without a license if you're in a state that requires a license. Now, I know there are some states that do not require a license just to do property management. Again, this is different than selling real estate. So again, we get into the state-specific portion of this course. We'll see exactly what your state actually requires. Okay, but just make sure we know what the licensing requirements are. But then, what are the duties? What are the responsibilities of a property manager? And I will tell you, basically, they are twofold, but there's a lot that goes under these two requirements here. But number one is to maintain the client's property. You got to keep it maintained, take care of it, and then to maximize returns. Obviously the homeowner, the property owner rather, is going to want the most revenue they can possibly get. And the only way they're going to get the most revenue is if that property stays well maintained and you're able to maximize the returns on that property. Now, I will tell you, we're not going to get into a whole lot of how you do that, not in this module. This is sort of why I was saying, you need some more training before you get out there and actually do this. That would be my advice to you. But I would remember the property manager's primary duties is to maintain the property and maximize the returns. That's what your primary responsibility would be. So, if I'm going to manage property for someone, if you're going to represent someone in a legal capacity, then you're going to have to create that agency relationship. This is kind of like a lot like on the sales side as well. If I'm going to sell a house for the homeowner, then I have to create an agency relationship in order to provide legal professional services. Maybe legal is not the right word, but professional services to my client. Well, the same would apply when it comes to property management. If you're going to represent the property owner, then you need an agency relationship. And what document would have to be used to create that relationship? Obviously, it's just called a management agreement. That's what it's called. Agency applies in property management just like it would in sales. Really no difference there. And if you recall from a much earlier chapter or in this material, we were talking about the different types of agents. Remember, you could have a universal agent, special agent, or general agent. And just in case they should ask you this on the exam, I just want to cover it real quick. But you remember the property manager in charge, just like a broker in charge, that's considered the special agent. But if I'm a property manager in charge, that means I could also hire and take on property managers that are working for me. I can't take on a salesperson, but I can take on property managers, right? And if you're a property manager, then you're considered a general agent. So the property manager in charge is always special. If you're not in charge, you're not that special. You're just general. I know that may not sound all that good, but it helped me on the exam. That's how I remembered it. Anybody in charge must be special. Anybody that works for the person in charge is just general. That's the way I remembered it. So hopefully, if you don't like that, then you can come up with your own way of memorizing something. All right. So when we talk about this management agreement or management contract, we know that creates the agency relationship. So now the property owner is your client. And even though there's going to be probably a lot more stuff in the management agreement than what we see right here, but these are things that you have to have in that agreement. These are kind of the core provisions that need to be in the management contract. One, we got to have a good description of the property. Now, when we say description, we're not talking about wood siding or vinyl siding and color, none of that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the legal description. We need the address, we need the tax map number, and you need the legal description. The lot, block, and stuff like that. Fill in all the blanks. We talked about this when we went over contracts. I'm telling you, if there's a blank in the document, it needs to be filled in. You should not be leaving blanks blank. And when you get to the paragraph where it's talking about the description of the property, you'll see where they have blanks to fill in the legal description. The address, which obviously most people will do that. The tax map number. All that has to be included under the description of the property. And then whatever the terms and provisions that would be necessary between the property owner and the property manager, need to be there. And let me just say this too. I think what you will find, if you get into managing property, one thing you're going to find, these management agreements are they're not going to be the same for one owner versus the other owner. Because, pretty much every single property is going to have different terms and different provisions. You'll have some owners that will tell you, Frankie, I want you to manage this property and I want nothing to do with it. Don't call me about anything. If something breaks, you fix it. You take care of it. Take it out of the rent. All that will be worked out in terms of how much the property manager has to do versus how much the owner wants to retain or do for themselves. Y'all, you'll actually have some says, I just want you to find a good tenant, collect the rent, and send me the proceeds. I'll take care of everything else that needs to be done. So, y'all, you just need to be very clear in the agreement and identify exactly what the owner is going to do, what their responsibilities are, and then what the property manager's responsibilities are. And go over this with them. Don't just type it in there and have them sign something. You better go over all this to make sure there is absolutely no misunderstanding about who's supposed to do what, right? Because quite frankly, at least it would be for me, depending on how much of the responsibility you want me as the manager to absorb, that's going to have a lot to do with how much I charge to manage the property, right? So pretty much everyone's going to be different. So make sure all those terms and provisions are in there. Obviously you want to discuss the compensation. How is that going to work? How much will it be? How will it be paid and stuff like that? I will just tell you, just as an example, not to suggest how much or how you should charge, but I think a lot of property managers tend to charge a certain percentage of the rental amount each month. Okay, so whatever that rent. So if it was, say, and again, this is for example purposes only. I am in no way trying to suggest what you should charge, and quite frankly, don't even know what property managers tend to charge, at least around here anymore. I don't do this anymore. I haven't done it probably for 20 years. But just for example, I might have in the agreement that my fee is going to be 10% of the rental amount each month. So if I'm renting a property out for $1,500 a month, 10% of that is $150. So I'm going to make $150 off this property each month, to manage it and so forth. But whatever you agree to, just make sure that's clearly laid out and understood in the management agreement. And then, as we were talking about, I've already talked about this, but make sure you're very clear in the agreement on how much authority is going to be handed over to the property manager to manage the property versus how much the owner is going to keep and do for themselves. What is the authority? What are these responsibilities of all the parties? Y'all be careful with this. I'm telling you, if you're not very clear and detailed, something's going to fall through the cracks, and then we're going to be pointing fingers. Well, no, you said you were going to do that. No, I didn't. I never said that. You should have done that. And here we go. I'm telling you, that's not going to be very good business practice. Okay? So be very detailed. Be very clear on who's doing what. That's the management agreement.